Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock. Got a really cool, practical, astrological teaching point here that we're going to talk about with Robert, and I'm going to let him explain the whole thing. We are talking about the topic of opening and closing aspects. Robert, take it away.
Wow, thank you for bringing that up. Most people read a transiting square to a natal planet like a transiting square to a natal planet. That's all they think about. They think it's a square, period. It isn't. There are two kinds of squares. There's an opening square and there's a closing square. The first, let's just think about visually, if you place your sun on the ascendant, and let's say your sun is in Scorpio, Thomas, and you place it on the first cusp. Well, transiting Saturn is in Aquarius now. So it is in an opening square. It's 90 degrees away from the sun. So it's beginning, when it squares that sun, it represents a new start in life because it's Saturn involved. So it has to do with the structure of your life, and Saturn's a slow-moving transit. So this is not going to be one day. This is going to be a period. And when it's at the top of, if you still place Scorpio sun on the ascendant and you have a closing square from transiting Saturn, then it would be in Leo at the top of the chart, closing in. It's 180 degrees around from the ascendant. So it's closing in like a waning moon, a third quarter moon. It's moving toward a conjunction with the point that we're talking about, namely the sun in Scorpio. Was that clear?
Yeah, kind of, sort of. All right. So what then defines opening? So back to our example. We're putting the sun in Scorpio on the ascendant. As you were mentioning, Saturn being in Aquarius puts Saturn down there at the cusp of, in essence, the fourth house, right? A cardinal point.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Is everything from the ascendant to that first 90-degree aspect, is that part of the opening? Or are we talking that it picks up at that first square and then begins?
No, we're just talking about this square alone. Now, again, you can place any point in your natal chart mentally on the first cusp and do the same thing with the transits. So if you had...
okay. Let me ask a better question then. All right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, sort of, kind of, but let me clarify here because I know this is a little bit complicated. So what you mentioned was Scorpio sun on the ascendant. All right, let's just make this really simple. Put that over at the 9 o'clock position on the clock. And what he was saying is, now, today, as we're recording this in August of 2022, Saturn is in Aquarius. Put that at the 6 o'clock position on the clock. That's the opening square. Does this only apply to square aspects?
No, it applies to every aspect. Every aspect. So when you're considering a particular transit to a point, let's say in this case, transiting Saturn in Aquarius squares the sun in Scorpio, then you mentally place the sun in Scorpio on the first cusp and look at where Saturn is. And as you pointed out, it's in the fourth house. And this is an opening square. Something big and something major and something long-term is beginning with Scorpio in that fourth house square position. It's opening up. The next aspect it's going to make, Thomas, is a trine to that sun in Scorpio when Saturn enters Pisces, for example. So something is starting under an opening square. Now, it depends on if it's a transiting Mercury. It may be something very trivial that's starting. But with any of the major planets, from really Mars on out, the corresponding thing that's starting will be proportionately bigger and of more duration and more importance. So it's not uncommon, for example, when Saturn passes over that fourth house square, that something or even sometimes someone is figuratively or literally dying. And it sort of marks the end of an era for that person in their lives at the same time that this new thing is starting, it's beginning. And from that point on, Saturn will be transiting a trine to the point we're talking about, which is the sun. That'll transit an inconjunct to it, then an opposition, and gradually it'll finally move up to where Saturn again squares the sun in Scorpio when Saturn is in Leo, which would be in about 14 years from now. And that's a culmination point in life, as opposed to something starting. Something is culminating during the transit of Saturn in a 10th house square or a closing square.
So that's the midheaven, right? The culmination of.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it falls off of that midheaven 10th house point, it's winding down.
But you can say the same thing with transiting trines. You have an opening trine. If you imagine again the sun in Scorpio remaining right there on the first cusp, then as Saturn enters Pisces, that's an opening trine to that sun in Scorpio, which gives you, if it's Saturn, a 2.5-year period where the person should be taking a chance, a calculated risk on themselves and their talents. Because that transiting Saturn in Pisces is trining that sun in Scorpio from the 5th house of children, which can mean either creative children, like a business entrepreneur or starting a self-employment venture, or literal children having a baby in the 5th house. But during that 2.5-year transit of Saturn in Pisces, it's absolutely an opening opportunity and growth cycle for what began under the previous opening square of transiting Saturn, if that makes sense.
What do you do with the opposition?
I like them because they are a polarity. Now, if they involve malefics, they are going to be challenging, no question about it. But they are a polarity, unless they are across the line of sign. Let's say you have one planet at 1 degree Scorpio and another planet at, say, 29 degree Aries. Well, technically they're in opposition, but they're not in complementary signs. Aries is fire, Scorpio is water. A typical opposition would be the sun in Scorpio and a planet in Taurus. But by orbs, you see, you can still have a planet at the tail end of Aries, let's say, that technically is in opposition, but typically it's harmonious elements. So you have Scorpio and Taurus as a rule. So you've got earth and water, which classically makes bricks, and so on. So the same with fire and air opposition. So within an opposition, what I like to do is take into account the planets that are in opposition. And then the first thing I do is look to see if a third planet aspects both ends of the opposition. If it's a square, then that third planet will square both ends of the opposition, in which case there will be more of a critical nature to the events and changes that are going on. If that third planet sextiles one end of the opposition and trines the other end of it, then it's going to be a beneficial opposition. You see what I mean? It's a whole different opposition in that case. So oppositions are not always malefic, quote unquote, to quote the old books.
All right, so let's maybe make this tangible where people can see something that we've done here. So for me, if you were taking this, you were kind of using my example. You said Scorpio sun placed in the first house. So right now, if we're looking at the day that we're recording this on August 30th, 2022, Saturn is down in the 4th house at 20 degrees Aquarius. That's the opening square.
Yes, and look, Thomas, this is a perfect example of how this works. When Saturn transited through Aquarius and squared your sun in Scorpio, and mentally we're placing that sun at the first cusp, Saturn is in an opening square, and Saturn is a slow-moving major planet that is associated with business and career and home, where you live. You look at what's happened to you with this transit of Saturn squaring your sun and an opening square. For I don't know anything else about you, but I know that you began these podcasts with me under this Saturn opening square. And I am stunned and pleased at how rapidly these have taken off and how well placed they are in the list of astrology podcasts and so on, owing all of this to you. I started to say it certainly partly to me too, but without your professional skills, your Saturn skills in broadcasting, Aquarius, electronic media, working out of your home, the fourth house, at such a professional level, you are a one-man operation here. You're a producer, you're a director, you're the audio talent, you're the technical end of everything. So you're producing these things. And it's starting a whole new career vector for both of us.
Wow.
Really. So that's how this works.
Wow.
That's an opening square.
So Saturn squares are not that bad.
You got it.
Especially if it's in the right place. Okay, and then with Saturn, would it be also good to say or proper to say that this is something that will last? This is something that has a foundation? This is something that is of good structure, longevity, maybe even outlasts both of us?
100%, because it's occurring in fixed signs. So long after I'm gone, and probably after you're gone as well, these things will still be there.
Well, that's one of the things that I've talked to Robert about this, and this was unrehearsed, y'all, so this is like, but one of the things that I've talked to Robert about is that part of my estate planning that I'm going to be doing is putting together a succession plan for these podcasts. And so this, hopefully, if I get that structured and the universe gives us days to get, these things in order, that this will continue beyond both of us. So could be the chance here, Robert, that people are listening to this and we are both looking back down from the non-physical. And hopefully that's the way we exactly structure it, as it should be.
Amen. As they used to say in ancient Egypt, amen, Ray.
Or back at the Baptist church when I was growing up.
Or back at the Baptist church.
That's it. All right, now let's move that Saturn up. And though it were in Leo, if it were in Leo, now in the 10th house, how would that be different?
That would be a culmination of what you began probably 14 years ago if it's a career trend. But in any case, however you've developed that new start under the opening square, that will tend to culminate, especially during the 2.5 years Saturn transits, the closing square to your first house sun in Scorpio. So as it moves through the 10th house, you'll be consolidating everything that you've developed in, let's say, this in your career, let's just say, with Saturn. And as it moves through the 11th house, you will be gradually taking it more, putting it out there in archives or in on YouTube, where it's like you're talking about your legacy, where you're leaving a legacy to the group. And then when Saturn finally goes through the 11th and the 12th and culminates again by conjoining your sun in Scorpio, that is a second culmination, after which, for the 2.5 years, it basically goes through Scorpio, after which you will begin to become more private and now you've succeeded with this major career, whatever that was. You've had the first culmination, now you had a second culmination. It's not that you necessarily retire, but you might go inward to start doing more private research or taking what you've established up until that point in a different new direction. You may write a book, for example, when Saturn gets into the third and so on, or you may really retire from the field and literally retire. And then you're faced with Social Security and Medicare issues and those kinds of. So that's the overall cycle of Saturn in terms of opening and closing squares.
Wow, that is fascinating. That is great. Now, we put the sun on the first house at the ascendant. Can you put any planet there? Is that something that you can run this process with any planet?
Yes, sir. You ultimately can do it mentally, but yes, sir. You can take any birth planet. You can take Mercury, which also has a lot to do with your work. Rules Virgo and service and what you do for a living and so on, what you technically, physically do for a living. So you can place Mercury on the first cusp and then look to see where transiting whatever is in relation to it. You can take Venus. If you want to know about your love life, you take your natal Venus and put it on the first cusp and look at where the transits are. Where's your natal Venus?
In Virgo.
So right now, Saturn is in conjunct your natal Venus, which doesn't necessarily indicate a time for going to Las Vegas and getting married at an Elvis chapel. You know
I'm not
I mean?
looking for that right
That's
now.
good. That's probably good.
I'm living my highest timeline on my chart. I'm not looking for that.
Listen, if Elvis blesses your marriage, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, the last time I was in Vegas, you know what I did?
No.
I went to that Elvis chapel, and it's right around the corner from the pawn shop.
Very glamorous.
Yeah, I went to the broadcasters convention in Vegas, and I was only there. I'm not a gambler, so I don't go to the casinos, and I can't stand smoke. So, you know, I stayed away from that. But I went to the pawn shop in the Elvis chapel. That's me doing up Vegas.
I will never forget, man. One evening playing blackjack. I think it was at Harrah's, because I was staying at the Mirage across the street, but playing blackjack because they had the most fun blackjack pit of any casino. There was a couple at my table. They had just gotten married. They were maybe 35 or so. They were the happiest couple you ever saw, and they were letting and of course they had been drinking a little bit, but they were letting everybody know. And they had just met 3 days before, so who knows, you know, how lasting that would be. But how romantic can it get? You meet somebody in Vegas and you get married within 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, this is a really
by
good.
Elvis.
Yeah, by Elvis, of course, by Elvis. And then you go to the pawn shop for your wedding gifts. Okay, so
I just hope I hope the impersonator didn't sing Heartbreak Hotel as the wedding anthem. So.
Right, exactly. Well, you know, what I'm thinking here, too, is this is a real practical example of why you should have some astrology program on your phone so that as these things come up, you can throw up a quick chart, because some of us, Robert, are not as mentally developed as you are with this, and putting it in our mind to move a planet to the first house, just we're not there yet. So you have a phone app, you can put your natal chart up, you can put the transit chart up, you can look at all of it right there at your fingertips.
Absolutely. I've got two on everybody has time passages. I think it's a free one. But the one that I really use and have used ever since he came out with it is called Ephemeris. And it's by a man named Clifford Ribaudo, who lives in Portugal. I think he is Austrian. He teaches English in Portuguese, and he's also a high-tech wizard. And he created this phenomenal program, really. On your iPhone, it's almost like having a full astrology program like you and I used on your phone. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is a good one. I use Astro Gold, which is written by the folks who developed the Astro Gold software for the Mac, and also are the programming team behind the very popular Windows program called SolarFire. So that's the one I use. It's a little pricey, but it's equally good. So yeah. All right. Well, this is super effective. Thank you so much. What a great study in something that we can use to pattern these cycles. And you know, this is one of the fun things about mastering astrology is it's almost like surfing. For a brief 8 months, I lived down on the beach in Florida in St. Augustine. And that's a little surf town. And when these guys and gals would paddle out there and catch a wave, you know, and they were always looking, and they pass this one up and pass this one up, and then finally, boom, they get on one, and what a great ride. And then you hear the hooting and the hollering and the laughing and everything that goes with it. This is like you can take a pass, and I'm take a pass, going to work on the shadow side of that, and then finally, boom, you get on a wave. And you get on it, and that's when life really gets fun.
You got it. That's exactly what this is for, is to make life a joy to live. And it's such a great way. It really is. I've done this for so long. with myself, and to realize how these archetypes, the planets, the aspects, and so on, really do work in real life. And then to have an app on your phone where if you're faced with an important decision out in the world in real life, do I want to make, I just used this the other day. I was considering purchasing a $500 watch. Do I need another watch for $500? No. So I'm looking, I instantly used ephemeris, called up a horoscope, looked at the fifth house, which is luxury items. And the ruler of the fifth was opposite the ruler of the opposite house, which is an horary technique. Instantly, I knew, don't buy it, because it was a needless luxury, just a needless luxury. So I didn't. So I can use it that way, very pragmatic. You've heard me talk about making car decisions about whether to lease a car or buy a car, and the chart said very clearly, don't lease it, buy it, and so on. So it's astrology is so pragmatic in that way, which appeals to my Jupiter and Mercury and Virgo side, as well as my Capricorn rising. I need all the help I can get with practical decisions. I'm a Libra.
This is great. What a practical application. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Robert is available for consultations if you'd like to get with him. And we have a Discord channel where this whole conversation is extended beyond the podcast, with the incomparable Kristen Lawhead taking that Discord channel and just turning it into a real great place to continue to talk about astrology on all kinds of levels. All of that information is in the show notes. So thanks for listening today. We'll see you next time on Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.